morning. The subtitle of the second chapter of Parker Palmer's book that we are currently studying is Rejoining Soul and Role. And that's not something that's like, what are you talking about? So it occurred to me, some of you may know I have a master's degree in directing as well as having a master's of divinity degree. And actually when I was in undergraduate school, I was taking a directing class. And one of the ways that we analyze plays is called right role analysis, and that's right, R-I-T-E. Okay? And essentially what it means is that as we look at a script, what we're seeing is people performing rituals. Okay? Like this ritual might be the family dinner. Okay? And so within that ritual, everybody is playing a particular role. Like, the youngest kid may be playing the role of jester. Okay? Dad might be playing the role of autocrat, or he might be playing the role of bump on a log. Right? Okay? And in family systems, we very often fall into those roles by rote. And you may have gotten all grown up, and gone out into the world, and then you go home for Thanksgiving, right? And you slide right back into that role that you played for all those years at the dinner table, right? Okay, so we're talking about those roles that we play, and the idea that we need to rejoin our soul to our role means that at some point there was a disconnect, right? And so what Parker says is that for most of us, that disconnect happens in childhood. At some point in childhood, we're told, you're getting this wrong, kid. You can't be yourself. You can't act that way. You're too loud. You're too happy. You're having too much fun. You're not supposed to be touching that. Whatever it might be, right? And so we set off on this journey away from our soul. We set off on this journey that is essentially one for approval, for love, for acceptance by the folks on the outside. And, now for a while, we may stay in touch with our inside. And he talks about how there's this secret life of children. And, we're all probably kind of familiar with that. One of the ways we're most familiar with it is in stories, right? When you think about, say, the Chronicles of Narnia, about the kids that go through the closet into this magical world, or Alice in Wonderland, how she goes through the looking glass, and how the kids in the L. Frank Baum books go to Oz. There's another place where kids can really feel in touch with who they originally were, in a place where it's the right thing to do the right thing and to be who you truly are, where magic exists, where miracles happen, where at the end of the day the good guys and gals win things, right? And then as time goes by, it seems for a lot of us we lose touch with that secret world. We put it in a box along with our imaginary friends, and we don't go back to it. Now, there may be times when we're under extreme duress, when, that becomes our escape. As I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about who do I know that are kids that were really under a lot of pressure, and one of the first ones that came to me was Anna Frank. And it's interesting, as most of you remember, I'm sure, she was in hiding in a couple of hidden rooms in her father's, not quite a factory, but in her father's place of business in Holland during the Second World War. She was Jewish. And her family had gone into hiding, and then a couple other folks went with them. And they were eventually found by the Germans and put in concentration camps. And she and most of her family ended up dying. But writing became that secret world for her. Journaling became that secret world. And she had some amazing things to say. And when I think about what children want to become compared to what they see around them, some of the things she said almost on her last days before they were captured come back. This is from the 5th of April of 1944. I believe they were captured around the 1st of May. She says, and if I don't have the talent to write books or newspaper articles, I can always write for myself, but I want to achieve more than that. I can't imagine living like Mother, Mrs. Von Don, and all the women who go about their work and are then forgotten. I need to have something besides a husband and children to devote myself to. I want to be useful or bring enjoyment to all people, even those I've never met. I want to go on living even after my death. And that's why I'm so grateful to God for having given me this gift, which I can use to develop myself and to express all that's inside me. When I write, I can shake off all my cares. My sorrow disappears. My spirits are revived. But, and that's a big question, will I ever be able to write something great? Will I ever become a journalist or a writer? And she was, right then. Just like so many of us in those moments when we are connected to who we truly are, sometimes we don't even know it, and we walk away from it. I think about all the kids who've laid something down, something creative, because their parents told them, you'll never make a living doing that. Jim Carrey talks about his why he ended up becoming an actor, and this was at a graduation ceremony that he spoke at, and he goes back and reminisces about his dad, who was an accountant, and when his dad was about 50, he was laid off and then couldn't find a job. And it's not that his dad loved numbers. His dad was an accountant because it was supposed to be one of those kind of recession-proof jobs that people are always going to need accountants. And Jim's point was, you can fail at a job that you hate. So why not be that person that you want to become? Why not do those things that light your soul up? Because we all need that, and the world needs us in that way. The world needs us to be people with their souls on fire. Amen? Well, what happens when we don't? And I think he makes this pretty clear. He says we feel fraudulent, even invisible, because we're not in the world as who we really are. He says the light that is within us cannot illuminate the world's darkness. We think that. And we think that the darkness that is within us cannot be illuminated by the world's light. When I read that, I was reminded of Robin Williams. I don't know if you know anything about his history, but Robin grew up in a household. His father was a really high-level executive for GM. He was very wealthy, and his mother was a model, and so they were gone quite a lot when Robin was a child. He was an only child, and so he was largely raised by their maid. And what he ended up doing, as a lot of us did, is he ended up raising himself. And what he would do is he would take his little toy soldiers and he would go off and play in this big house. And he'd come up with little voices for all of them, and essentially lived in a secret world. Now, that secret world obviously gave him some tools that made him a really special comedian and a really special improvisational artist. When he got to the Juilliard School, which was and still is one of the primary acting schools in America, they almost didn't know what to do with him. And finally, when he was a junior, John Houseman, who's a famous actor and director and acting teacher, told him, he's like, you just need to go. We can't teach you anything else. Right? That sense of isolation, I think, is part of what stayed with him and part of the pain that eventually drove him to take his own life. But that sense of play was something that stayed with him throughout his life and his career. But that light, that I think he looked for in people's laughter, it never did completely erase the darkness that he carried with him, that loneliness. Parker says we project our inner darkness on others, making enemies of them and making the world a more dangerous place. And I think that in his case, that's certainly something he did. Our inauthenticity and projections make real relationships impossible, leading to loneliness. And our contributions to the world, especially through the work that we do, are tainted by duplicity and deprived of the life-giving energies of true self. It gets scary. We don't know how to deal with things because we were taught as little kids, you can't be yourself. It's not safe. You got to learn this other way. You got to be this other way. Even when deep inside us we know that there's something wrong with that other way, that not only is it not us, but it's just not right. Parker tells a story of a fellow in one of his circles of trust, and we're going to talk more about circles of trust later on, and hopefully we'll be able to actually start doing at least a circle, if not more than one circle here. This fellow, he was doing this in Washington, D.C., and had a lot of people from government in this circle. And one day, as they're getting ready to do the work, he's approached by this fellow that works in the Department of Agriculture, and he looks like he's had a rough night. And this is a guy who spent about 25 years of his life as a farmer out in the Midwest, who was very connected to the land, ended up going to work for the federal government in the Department of Agriculture. And so he said, I've been struggling, and I needed to share this. He said, I've got something going on at work right now, and we are being lobbied to do something about topsoil by a lot of agribusiness people, but I know that that's not the right thing to do. He said, the farmer in me knows that, we need to write the regulation or do whatever it is the other way. And he said, I know I'm going to get in trouble with my boss, but I have to do that. And he said that it came to him just as a result of the work of being involved in this circle, of being forced to examine what's really inside him. Parker said that he didn't know what ended up happening to that fellow. He said, I'd like to be able to tell you that everything worked out just fine, but I really don't know. But that's still a victory. Whether or not that guy was able to get the Department of Agriculture to change their ways and be more affected by what's good for the land than by what's good for agribusiness, we don't know. But at least in that moment, that guy confronted his fear. He was able to take a look at what was on the inside and what was on the outside and say, you know what? It's time to step up, and it's time to act in authenticity. And that's not easy. I mean, there are a whole slew of things that make being authentic difficult. And Parker talks about some of them. He says some of the resistances that we're going to come up against, and some of you guys may go northy southy when I read some of these off because they're going to sound familiar. First comes denial. Surely what I've seen about myself cannot be true. It's like, no, we're fine. The way I've been doing business is, that's okay. We're not the bad guys here, right? Next comes equivocation. The inner voice speaks softly, and truth is a subtle, slippery thing. So how can I be sure of what my soul is saying? Right? We get that little hit, and we're like, nah. Sometimes it's like similar to when you get to an intersection and you're going the way you always go to work, and something just tells you to go the other way today, and you're like, nah, and you go the way that you always go, and you end up stuck in a traffic jam for half an hour. that little voice, sometimes we just don't want to listen to it because it's not saying what we're used to hearing. Next comes fear. If I let that inner voice dictate the shape of my life, what price might I have to pay in a world that sometimes punishes authenticity? And then fear becomes cowardice. It says next comes cowardice. The divided life may be destructive, but at least I know the territory, while what lies beyond is terra incognita. I think that's an interesting distinction between fear and cowardice. Fear is just, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, right? But cowardice is, I know what we're doing right now is wrong, but I can live with that. You know? So, the last of the resistances that he talks about is greed. And that's one that I think we all see a lot of examples of these days. In some situations, I am rewarded for being willing to stifle my soul. And that happens all the time out there on the other side of the window in the real world, the other 167 hours a week. You know, whether it's an actual monetary reward or the reward of being able to fit in where we are paid, or simply the reward that we get from fitting into society, of not being different, of not being the nail that sticks up, right? Those of us who are maybe a little more theologically liberal here in Alabama know what that feels like. Right? I was at the vet center earlier this week, and when I went up and gave the receptionist my information, and she wanted to know where I worked, and I said, well, I'm a senior minister at Unity of Birmingham, and they always ask, oh, well, where's that church? Well, then she asked me, so what book do you teach from? I said, well, we use the Bible, but right now we're teaching from, and I started, and I could tell she was just like kind of giving me the stink eye. Not quite sure about this guy. Sometimes it's just easier to play along. I get it. I mean, I'm the nail that sticks up and gets hammered on a lot. But the truth is every time we stand up for who we are, we move the needle just a little. And the way Parker says it is great. He says, every time we get in touch with the truth source we carry within, there is net moral gain for all concerned. Every time we get in touch with the truth source we carry within, there is net moral gain for all concerned. Even if we fail to follow its guidance fully, we're nudged a bit further in that direction. And then the next time we're conflicted, it becomes harder to forget or deny that we have an inner teacher. I like this. He quotes Václav Havel. How many of you know who Václav Havel is? Right? When I read that, he says he's the architect of the Velvet Revolution and the former president of Czechoslovakia, I always thought of the guy as a playwright. But then, that's a couple of degrees in theater. But he says, and he is a seeker of political integrity, and he says that this search for authenticity is hidden throughout the whole of society. This potential, Havel writes, is found in everyone who is living within the lie and who may be struck at any moment by the force of truth. He became the president of the Czech Republic. It was towards the end of the 90s. But as far back as 1965, he wrote a play called The Memorandum. And in that play, an incomprehensible artificial language is imposed on a large bureaucratic enterprise, causing the breakdown of human relationships and their replacement by unscrupulous struggles for power. In these and subsequent works, Havel explored the self-deluding rationalizations and moral compromises that characterize life under a totalitarian political system. Right? The self-deluding rationalizations and moral kerfuffles choices that we make. So he's just talking about a totalitarian system where everyone is being forced into behaving a particular way just to survive, just to stay out of jail, just to keep from getting killed by the secret police. And that one of the things that ends up happening is that these people are forced to learn a garbage language, and it keeps them confused, and they break down, and they start struggling amongst themselves for power. And I think about that play that was written in 1965 by a guy behind the Iron Curtain. And I think about us today and about what has been happening around us. You know, we don't live in a totalitarian system quite. But what we are, you know, we're kind of like those frogs that are slowly being boiled. What has happened to us is over time, we have allowed money to become our God. And we have become prisoners in this capitalistic system that says that the pursuit of money is what it's all about, and that whatever we need to do along the way is okay. It doesn't matter if we don't pay the bills to the contractors that did the work for us. We can just declare bankruptcy, and it's legal. And the reason it's legal is because folks that have the money and want to make more of it that way have convinced the people who make the laws to write the laws to make behaving immorally legal. And we go along with it because, geez, it's legal, right? Might as well. And because the people that have the money and the power are the people that have the money and the power, you know, we sort of go along with it. And we watch the media that they put out. And even when it becomes a language of garbage that doesn't make any sense, we keep turning on the TV and firing up the radio and checking out the internet and the papers. And day after day, many of us make moral choices that become just a little less palatable. You know, when I think of places where obedience to those in power became most toxic and provided the starkest moral choices, I'm obviously led back to Nazi Germany. And I was doing some research, you know, just wondering, what did those people think when they saw what was going on around? How did they reconcile that? And I found a story that I can't share all of because it's horrifying. But there was a fellow named Kurt Gerstein, and he was actually kind of a resistance person, and yet he found himself appointed head of the technical disinfection department of the Waffen SS, and he was responsible for improving the efficiency of the gas chambers by procuring the highly toxic prussic acid Zyklon B. Something I did not know. You know, up until they started doing that, what they would actually kill people with was exhaust fumes. They would shove them into a room so tightly that when they died, they couldn't even fall over. And then they would fire up a diesel engine and let the exhaust go in until everyone was dead. And then they couldn't do it fast enough. And so they came up with this stuff. Well, this guy stayed involved in this process, although what he did do to relieve his conscience was he started telling people. And there was a story of him telling, I think it was a Swedish ambassador or a diplomat, exactly what he had just seen after visiting one of these camps. And he kept trying to get the word out, and the sad thing is people didn't believe him. This particular guy ended up staying in place and doing the things that he was asked to do, although from time to time he would attempt to sabotage something, say, oh, hey, we got a bad batch of the poison gas here, can't use this. Got to dump it out. But he was still in on it, and he was actually arrested after the war was over with and was being interrogated and would have been put on trial for war crimes, but he died. And they don't know if he hung himself or if he was killed by other SS members once they found out what he'd been up to. The descriptions of what some people were willing to do to other people is horrifying. But knowing that, we are able to make some different choices. Today, and I found this very fascinating, instead of blind obedience, the German army emphasizes something they call Innere Führung, if I said that correctly, which is a hard-to-translate concept that centers the military experience around the inner conscience of each individual. So as a result, German soldiers can refuse combat assignments or disobey orders with nothing wrong. The soldiers must not obey unconditionally, the government has written, but carry out an obedience which is thinking. So we're making some progress in some areas, and yet, as we all know, when we go out those doors, some of us are going to be asked to compromise who we truly are, aren't we? And the question for each one of us is, where do we say no? Where do we draw the line? So what Parker suggests is that there is a way that we as adults can get back in touch with our inner self, with who we are. And there are some ways that we have attempted to do this that are not so effective. And he goes on to describe some of the kinds of groups that he'd been involved with that were very sort of in your face, where people could just say whatever was on their mind. And this goes back to like the 60s and 70s when things were a little more freewheeling. It's like, I can say whatever's in my mind right now. When we get in groups and we start saying whatever's on our mind about somebody else, it may not be what they need to hear. It may not be appropriate. It may not even be right. Right? So what he talks about is creating those kinds of groups in which we give each other the space simply to be, where we can allow each other and ourselves room to grow, a place where there's trust, a place where, the silence is as important as what is said. He says there's no easy 10 steps to an undivided life, and that anybody that tells you there is probably trying to sell you some snake oil. What he says is that first, we all have an inner teacher whose guidance is more reliable than anything we can get from a doctrine, ideology, collective belief system, institution, or leader. Even me. You all have in you the truth, each and every one of you. It's our job to do together is to try to kind of get past all the conditioning from everything that we've been through out there so that you can hear it. And what we want to do is we want to create a space, and this is our first space where we do that. But we want to be able to create more spaces where we do that. And he says, second, we all need other people to invite, amplify, and help us discern the inner teacher's voice for at least 3 reasons. The journey toward inner truth is too taxing to be made solo. Lacking support, the solitary traveler soon becomes weary or fearful and is likely to quit the road. I'll tell you, as somebody who is in recovery, I understand it. We don't make it alone, but together we make it. The path is too deeply hidden to be traveled without company. Finding our way involves clues that are subtle and sometimes misleading, requiring the kind of discernment that can only happen in dialogue. Right? Sometimes, you just need somebody else to help you see the breadcrumbs because you can't see them. I know I do. And the destination is too daunting to be achieved alone. We need community to find the courage to venture into the alien lands to which the inner teacher may call us. Back when I talked about how do we know? How do we know that inner voice? How do we know that that's the real deal? That's one of the reasons that we have other people to help us, right? That's the finding the clues that are subtle and sometimes misleading, requiring the kind of discernment that can happen only in dialogue. So I want to leave you with this one last little story. He was doing another trust circle, and throughout the weekend that they were there, there was an African-American fella that wasn't really saying anything. And Parker was a little concerned about him. It was a mostly white group, and he wasn't sure that, that he'd made the guy feel comfortable enough to open up and be who he was. But the kind of the rules of engagement of these groups are such that, if you need to be alone, if you need your space, you're going to get your space, and we're not going to go sticking our, fingers in there, right? So at the end of the weekend, he's looking at the, like the reviews or the, the whatevers, and he gets this one from this particular fella. It says, "Thank you for helping me to deal with some of my anger. Life is too short to walk a path filled with spurs. I am not completely healed, but the process has begun. I want to give back the love and caring that was given to me. This retreat made me deal with my ghost!" Exclamation, exclamation. Georgia, Nam, Vietnam, Texas were all my pits. Now that the healing has started, I feel strong and, for the first time, capable of feeling some sense of peace. This journey that we're on back to our wholeness, right? It needs to be done in a space that can be completely forgiving, can be completely quiet, can allow us the time that we need. But it's not a space that's completely empty. It's a space that's filled with people that are on this journey with us, people who love us for no reason other than that we are there with them. And as the next few weeks unfold, we're going to talk a little bit more about not just why we do this work, but how we are going to do this work. And I invite you to come along. I would also say, if you haven't taken advantage of it yet, come to the adult spiritual education starting at 9:30. It was like packed in there this morning, and from everything I've heard from everyone that was there, they're having just a great time working a little more deeply into this than I can do standing here talking at you for a little longer today than I should have. Sorry. Come back with us next Sunday. Take this journey with us, and remember that your soul, that perfect little you that you were when you were a child, it's still in there, and it's still loved, and it still has work to do in this world. Amen?